I'm Leah Small, and this is Virginia Voices, where you will hear first-person stories from people most affected by current politics, policy, and economic trends. We give Virginians outside the news a full stage to explore their thoughts and experiences beyond a few sound bites or paragraphs in a daily news story. Virginia Voices is a project of the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO. In recognition of Memorial Day, we're here with Deborah Skeldon, who lost her husband, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Skeldon, to ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Military veterans are twice as likely to develop ALS than the general population. Skeldon was a fighter pilot who flew more than 280 combat missions during the Vietnam War, and later completed his 23 years of military service as a trainer of Marine and Navy pilots. He flew commercially for 15 years after his military career. It's unknown why military veterans are more likely to develop ALS, a deadly neurological disease that attacks neurons needed for muscle movement, leading to severe paralysis and usually death within 2 to 3 years. The Mayo Clinic says the connection between military service and ALS could possibly be related to exposure to certain metals or chemicals, traumatic injuries, viral infections, and intense exertion. Higher incidence of the disease occurs in veterans who served during both war and peacetime, and across all branches. In 2008, the Department of Veterans Affairs announced that all veterans with ALS who served for at least 90 days were eligible for full disability benefits. Previously, full benefits were only extended to veterans of the Gulf War starting in 2001. Lieutenant Colonel Skeldon was diagnosed in 2004, but wasn't granted full disability coverage until the 2008 announcement from the VA. He died on August 23, 2014, at the age of 69. Deborah Skeldon honors her husband's memory by volunteering with Gold Star Wives of America and Wreaths Across America after a 23-year career in criminal justice, serving the Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshal Service. Deb, thank you so much for welcoming us into your home.
Thank you.
And being so generous with your time. Firstly, I really want people to get to know Patrick. How would you describe him to someone who didn't know him?
I can only say he was a great guy. The people that served with him loved him. He had an amazing sense of humor. He once did a full inspection on the tarmac of his squadron with a Groucho Marx mask on. And you know, you can't laugh or lose attention. So he was testing them. And they just really appreciated his humor and had how he supported them.
Did anybody fail the test?
No.
No? If you had only 3 words to describe Patrick, what would they be?
A loyal American. He's a good father. And he was a good grandfather, Papa. And he was a good husband. That's more than 3 words, isn't it?
It is, but it counts. It counts. Yeah. And Patrick had a long-time career as a military and commercial pilot. What did he love about his job?
Flying. He lived to fly. And he loved the country. His father was Air Force. His brother was Army. And they were both retired. He had an uncle who was an Army general. A lot of military in the family. So, seemed like the best way to serve his country. The reason that he retired when he did was because he was flying a desk. And he really wanted to fly an airplane, so he retired from the duty at the Pentagon. And he had reached the top of, how can I put this? He was not going to see more airtime because of his career projection. So he wanted airtime. So he flew for Comair after his retirement, and then Delta Airlines bought Comair. So he flew for Delta to make up those 15 years. I used to tell people we met on a blind date, and I wore the blindfold. But he was incredibly handsome, and he was funny, and he was very nervous. I remember that. A little shaky.
Aw.
By the end of the evening, he had settled down. It was 1980. I was 34 when we married 5 years later. We were out to dinner, and I said to him, it's been 5 years that we've been dating. Next year is leap year. This was in December. He'd just come back from a 2-week overseas. And I said, so I'm going to ask you to marry me. And he's like, whoa. And he said, let's talk about it. And we were planning to go to Maui over Christmas. So that's all that we did that week, was talk about it. Nothing else. We just talked for a week. And at the end of the week, we were at the airport to fly back. And he said, okay, pick a date, not January. So I picked the first Saturday in February, which turned out to be Groundhog Day. I didn't know it at the time.
Why not January?
It was too soon. But after 5 years, what is too soon? So,
How did you know he was the man you wanted to marry?
because I didn't want to be with anybody else. And he treated me very well. His family welcomed me. Yeah. You just know. And I am a firm believer that you don't find the one until you stop looking. And that's what happened. And we were married since 85 to 14. So.
Do you have any favorite moments of Patrick in uniform?
He just cut a real nice silhouette. I'll show you pictures of him.
I would like to see that.
And anytime I see a Marine in uniform, I mean, not camouflage, and I saw one in the commissary about 2 weeks ago, and I almost went up and said, I'm so glad you're here. You just bring back so many good memories. He was put on medical leave because of the ALS 1 week before he would have retired at 65. His diagnosis was in 2004. He had symptoms for a year, 2 years. In 2002, we figured was the first symptom. His was limb onset, so it was foot drop. He would trip and fall. And then it moved to his hands so that he couldn't type with the speech assisted device. My son was taking flying lessons, so he was out in Manassas with my son, and it was winter time, and there was ice on the ground. Well, he slipped and fell getting out of the car, broke his ankle. He kept saying, it's not broken, because if it's broken, he can't fly. I said, well, let's just go and get an x-ray. Well, it was broken. He was so mad. He would have walked on that broken ankle if he could continue to fly. So he had to take 6 weeks off.
And then from there, what were the next steps as far as signs and...
Slurred speech. And that's often one of the early signs of bulbar onset. People are accused of being drunk, and that's what somebody thought when they reported him, because his speech was slurred and he tripped going off a curb. It was really upsetting to him. So he went to see the chief pilot and took his union rep with him, and they made him go see the company doctor who had just learned about ALS. And that was the week before he would have actually physically retired. So they put him on medical leave for a week until he could retire.
And this was Delta Comair.
Delta, yeah.
How did he respond to that?
He was upset. Of course, he loved to fly, and he couldn't fly anymore. He actually, from first symptom, he survived 12 years. It was amazing, this determination to keep going. Oh, when I wasn't allowed to talk, early on, I wasn't allowed to talk when I was giving him dinner because there was a time he couldn't use his hands, so I would feed him. Because I would inevitably say something funny and then he'd choke on his food, so I wasn't allowed to talk when he was eating. That's a survival technique.
Right.
And then when he couldn't talk anymore, we would do the alphabet, ABC, and he would nod when I got to the bracket of letters. And then I would say A, B, or C. Well, my problem was, by the time I got to the third or fourth word, I couldn't remember what we'd already done. So I had to start keeping a whiteboard. And then one night, it was late. It was 10:30, 11. I was still working full time. He had me spell the. I said, don't ever do that to me again. The start of the sentence. I said, give me a noun, give me a verb, and we can guess the rest from there. I was so upset with him.
Did you ever have a way of understanding each other that I guess transcended words or any other method?
Our last anniversary, he said no gifts because he couldn't go out and shop. So I got him a pillow that said, love you more, because we used to say that to each other. So when I would say, I love you, he would nod at the pillow in the family room. Because we always said that to each other.
Can you tell me more about how you both really strived to enjoy the last 12 years of his life?
He really had a great sense of humor, and he could find the humor in anything. He rarely lost patience with the disease. He just knew that's what his lot in life was. And in the end, he donated his brain and spinal column to science. But he made sure anytime the subject came up that he was still using it. I couldn't take it until he was finished.
Can you tell me about more moments that he used his sense of humor to cope and help you cope?
Oh, we were at the mall one day, and he was in his power chair then. Somebody was with us, 2 other people, and we were walking along. And so there were 4 of us. And there were these 2 girls that were coming up on his left. They were trying to pass us. He sped up. I knew what he was doing. And they walked faster, and he went faster.
Did they
and until I said, Patrick, stop. And the other 2 people, I don't remember who was with us, didn't understand why we were suddenly walking so fast. They hadn't seen these girls trying to pass us. He was just a tease. He'd find humor in everyday situations.
Did you ever, he served for so long, and I was reading his obit, and the comments people left were just beautiful. The former pilots that he taught, people who served with him through the decades, was there anything said by a former friend or student that really stuck out to you?
I've had guys that were in the squadron with him who said that Pat was responsible for the man he is today. It's just a beautiful tribute. Yeah, he touched a lot of lives.
So I wanted to go back to the comment you had about Patrick being responsible for really building so many men. And what kind of dad was he?
Oh, he was a great dad. He was more of a friend than a father. Yeah, the kids think the world of him. I'm sure if they were here, they'd be in tears by now. Yeah. His call sign was Turtle, because he does everything slow, hence the 5 years of dating. So all pilots have a call sign, and his was turtle. So for birthdays and Christmases, there's always a turtle theme.
How do you even get a call sign? I know everyone has one.
Well, sometimes they're given to you. He wouldn't tell me how he got it, except that he does everything very slow.
Did you notice that about him and your relationship and your marriage, besides waiting the 5 years?
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't rush into anything.
Was there any time when that quality of his, that slowness, the taking his time was charming and a good thing?
Maybe that's why he lasted 12 years. He wasn't rushing into it because he didn't rush into things.
I'm sure losing control of your body.
Yeah, it was frustrating to him.
How did he react? What did he say?
It was the turtle in him. He was very patient with it. He knew what was happening. And you can't fight it. It was accepting. We just made the best of the circumstances that we could.
Did he amaze you with that level of acceptance? How so, if he did?
He was very strong. He was a strong man. And once he set his mind to something, he did it. His favorite song was Doing It My Way.
I wanted to point out a quote that really was striking to me while I was researching ALS and the connection to veterans. If these soldiers were dying in the field rather than quietly at home, we would leave no stone unturned. We would use the best existing resources to make sure they had whatever they needed to survive. And that was said by U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Thomas Mikolasik. He died of ALS in 2010. Well, do you have any thoughts about that?
I saw through the support group meetings young soldiers coming home from Afghanistan with ALS. One guy found out his wife was pregnant one day, and the next day he got his diagnosis. He did live to see that child, and I think that was before it was determined to be service-connected. That was a huge win for the ALS community, to have the resources of the VA. Of course, ALS is twice as likely for those who served in the military, but I've heard that there's a gene that all of us have. This just depends on whether or not it's turned on. So something in the military service turned that gene on.
The VA didn't formally recognize ALS as a service-related illness for all veterans until 2008. So there were, I guess, about 4 years that you were not receiving coverage from the VA. Can you tell us about the care Patrick needed and if you had any difficulties?
Well, we had to hire a private caregiver. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was wonderful. She had already been through ALS with another patient who had passed. So she had experience with that. We had long-term care insurance, so that helped with some of the expenses. The home modifications, we put in an elevator. And we did all of that before it was service connected. And Pat said to me one day, we're spending all this money, and what if I don't make it another 6 months? And because it was 3 to 5 years was what we were told. And I said, if it makes your life easier for a week or two, it's worth the investment.
And can you tell me about your experience with applying for disability? You said there was an appeals process.
I first applied in 2005, and that was when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. And about 6 months to a year after that, I expected to hear something, and I didn't. And so I got in touch with the VA, and they said, oh, we were so focused on Hurricane Katrina, your application is probably lost. And that was in 2016. I applied again, summer, and it was denied. in the spring of 17 because it wasn't a service-connected at that time. And I appealed it. I spent a lot of hours in the law library at work researching precedent. And I also knew a guy who had ALS who was an attorney, and he gave me a couple cases to cite. And I appealed. What did I say? That was 17? I was denied. Yeah. I thought it was the next 6 months, because that was in the spring, that it was approved. But it was a year later, on September 23rd, that I got my letter that day, and then I heard on the news the next day that it was a service-connected disorder. But they back paid me to when I not first applied, but second applied, past the denial.
Can you tell me if there were feelings of frustration with the process?
Well, I remember when it was denied, I said, they're trying to kill me. Because I was here, I was taking care of him. I was working full time, and I was trying to get the paperwork in. It took every waking moment. And then Pat just said, they're not trying to kill you. I wish I had kept a diary of when he lost his speech and when these different events, but I was so busy dealing with them, I couldn't do any more.
And can you tell me, especially in the last few years, how the illness impacted you and your quality of life as a person, as a caretaker?
The last years, I was tired all the time. There were times when I would be driving home from work and I'd have to go around the block until the tears dried up. It was just emotionally devastating just to see him in that situation. The last 2 weeks, he was on oxygen. And we were turning it up until we got to the maximum amount, and then I knew he wouldn't make it through the next week. And he passed in his sleep at about 1:30 in the morning.
Can you tell me about the moment you knew he was gone?
Well, I remembered he had told me he wanted to have an Irish wake. He was Irish. So I did some research into an Irish wake. Among other things, it says to open a window so the spirit can get out.
And going back to the week prior to Patrick's death, when you knew, the moment you were working the oxygen, what were your thoughts at that moment?
We had dealt with it for 12 years, and it was a journey that we were reaching the end of. And we had already mourned not walking, not talking, not eating a steak. We had already mourned all those daily activities. So the time he did pass, the mourning was over. It was kind of a relief that he didn't have to struggle anymore. And then my son came up in the bedroom and said, "Mom, why is the window open?" just leave it open for a few more minutes.
Humor to the end.
Yes, humor to the end. And that was one of his saying, "What's life without a little humor?" He said that a lot. But we had mourned everything. We'd both mourned his passing.
How should Americans view and regard veterans who didn't die in conflict, but who instead died decades later due to trauma or illnesses?
Agent Orange. Yeah, I knew a lot of those widows. That was a long, painful death, what Agent Orange did to people. My neighbor across the street lost her husband, not from ALS, it was cancer. And we were not close. We have become close since he passed. And she told me that I said something that was remarkable to her. Went over and I hugged her and I said, "Cynthia, it's never going to be okay, but it will get better. You have to find your new normal." And that was my focus for those next 3 to 4 years, seeking and finding my new normal.
And what did that begin to look like? What did you do to find your new normal?
I rested. I took care of myself. I was retired. I retired the year before he passed. I just couldn't do it anymore. Got with friends. We have a lunch bunch from work. We have an ALS lunch bunch too. We call ourselves Al's Gals. And it was interesting. One of the Al's Gals has a house in Connecticut on the water. So we would go up there for a little less than a week, and we would drink wine and we would reminisce. And what was interesting to me is last year was the first year we didn't end up in tears in our reminiscing. So we've found our new normal.
How did that feel when you realized that milestone of not crying?
It was like an awakening. None of the three of us teared up telling the stories. We're telling happy stories.
Thank you so much for your story and your time and your admirable resilience. I really appreciate you sharing about your life with Patrick with us. Thank you, Deborah.
You just don't know what you've got inside of you until you're tested. And we were tested and we made it through.
It's amazing.
He did with grace. Thank you for coming and hearing my story.